Have you ever felt like the walls of your world have collapsed? Like everything you built, everything you cherished, is gone in the blink of an eye. I have been there, and what I discovered in the ruins of my life changed me forever. Life is unpredictable. One moment you are standing on solid ground, confident in your plans, secure in your possessions, surrounded by people you trust. And the next, it feels like everything you believed in has vanished. I lost my job, my relationships crumbled, and even my health seemed to betray me. There were days I asked myself, who am I without all of this? But it was in that moment of emptiness that I discovered the most powerful truth. Losing everything is sometimes the only way to truly find yourself. Stay with me through this speech, because what I am about to share will not only tell you how I rebuilt my life, but it will also show you how you can discover your true self, even when it feels like the world has abandoned you. Loss is one of the most profound teachers we can ever encounter in life. When we lose something, whether it's a relationship, a job, a dream, or even our health, it is natural to feel devastated. There is a part of us that wants to fight against the reality of what has happened, a part that refuses to accept that life has shifted in a way we never imagined. I know this feeling all too well, because there came a time in my life when I lost everything I thought defined me. I lost my financial security, my reputation, and the sense of control I had worked so hard to maintain. At first, I felt betrayed, abandoned, and utterly powerless. I asked myself, why me? Why now? How could everything I have worked for be gone in a moment? And yet, it was in that moment of despair that I began to discover the hidden truth about loss. I began to see that loss is not the end. It is a beginning, a divine invitation to grow in ways we could never imagine when life is comfortable and predictable. Loss strips away the distractions, the illusions, and the false securities that we cling to. It forces us to face ourselves in our most raw, unguarded state. And when we are willing to face ourselves honestly, without excuses or justifications, growth begins to take place. Growth often comes disguised as pain, and the lessons of loss are among the most transformative we will ever experience. I realized that losing everything forced me to confront my weaknesses, my fears, and the areas of my life that were built on unstable foundations. Before my loss, I had a sense of pride, a sense of achievement that was tied to my possessions and my status. I measured my worth by what I had, who I knew, and what I could accomplish. But when all of that was stripped away, I was left with nothing but myself, and it was in that emptiness that I discovered a freedom I had never known. I discovered that my value is not determined by external circumstances, but by the core of who I am. I learned that when we lose everything, we are forced to redefine what truly matters. We begin to see that life is not about accumulating things or gaining approval, but about building character, developing resilience, and connecting with our inner strength and faith. I also realized that loss challenges us to let go of control. We live in a world that constantly tells us we can control our destiny, our outcomes, and our happiness if we just work hard enough or make the right decisions. But loss shows us that control is an illusion, that there are forces beyond our understanding, and that sometimes the only way forward is to surrender, to trust, and to allow ourselves to be guided through the storm. Embracing loss as a catalyst for growth means shifting our perspective from one of fear and despair to one of opportunity. It means asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? How can this experience shape me into a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person? It means recognizing that pain is not meaningless, that suffering has a purpose, and that the very experiences that break us can also be the experiences that make us. I remember the long nights I spent questioning everything, wondering if I would ever find my footing again. I remember the mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of disappointment and grief pressed down on me so heavily that it seemed as though I might never breathe freely again. But in those moments, I began to see glimmers of understanding. I realized that my loss had opened a door to a new way of living, one that required humility, patience, and a willingness to trust in a power greater than myself. Loss taught me to examine the roots of my desires, to distinguish between what was truly important and what was merely temporary or superficial. I began to see that some of the things I had clung to so tightly were not meant to last, and that my attachment to them had blinded me to the deeper joys and opportunities that awaited me. I discovered that when we let go of what we think we cannot live without, we make room for what we were always meant to embrace. A life filled with purpose, clarity, and spiritual depth. There is a profound lesson in recognizing that loss is often the mechanism through which God or life itself reshapes us. I came to understand that nothing is wasted, that every tear, every moment of anguish, every experience of disappointment carries within it a seed of transformation. When we are willing to examine our circumstances, to look beyond the immediate pain, we begin to see patterns, connections, and lessons that were invisible when life was easy and predictable. I also learned that loss can humble us in ways that nothing else can. Pride often keeps us blind to our weaknesses, to the areas in our character that need refinement. But loss strips away pretense and forces honesty. It forces us to face our mistakes, to accept responsibility, and to recognize that growth requires change, effort, and sometimes discomfort. In the wake of losing everything, I had no choice but to confront my fears, my doubts, and the insecurities that had quietly governed my life. I discovered that growth requires courage, that embracing loss requires bravery, and that the willingness to step into the unknown is what separates those who are transformed by life's challenges from those who remain trapped in despair. Moreover, I realize that loss connects us to others in ways that success never can. When we have nothing, when we are broken and vulnerable, we can no longer hide behind masks of perfection or accomplishment. We begin to reach out, to seek support, and to connect with the shared human experience of suffering and resilience. I found that in those moments, relationships became deeper, more authentic, and more meaningful. Loss, in its mysterious way, teaches empathy. It allows us to see the struggles of others with compassion and understanding because we have walked through our own shadows and returned with wisdom. The journey of embracing loss is not linear. There are days of despair, moments of doubt, and times when it feels easier to retreat into bitterness or self-pity. But each of these moments carries an opportunity to choose faith over fear, gratitude over resentment, and growth over stagnation. I learned that we cannot control when loss comes, but we can control how we respond. We can allow it to define us negatively, or we can allow it to redefine us positively. Every challenge, every setback, every stripped away possession or broken relationship is a chance to uncover strength we never knew we had, to develop resilience, and to cultivate a perspective that is unshakable, even in the face of life's harshest storms. Ultimately, I realized that loss is not a punishment, but a teacher. It is the force that shakes us awake, that removes what is unnecessary, and that challenges us to rise above circumstances. Embracing loss as a catalyst for growth requires a mindset shift. It requires seeing the invisible hand of guidance in the darkest of moments, trusting that every ending carries within it the seeds of a beginning, and believing that our lives are being shaped for a purpose greater than what we can see at the moment. When we embrace loss instead of resisting it, we discover resilience, clarity, and an inner strength that can never be taken from us, no matter how many times the world around us may crumble. It is in the crucible of loss that we find the raw materials for rebuilding our lives, for discovering our true selves, and for walking a path of transformation that is both profound and lasting. When everything falls apart on the outside, it forces us to turn inward. I had spent so much of my life chasing approval, chasing success, and defining myself by what others could see. My identity was tied to my possessions, my achievements, and the validation of those around me. I believed that if I could hold on to my reputation, my status, and my relationships, I would be complete. But when I lost all of that, I was confronted with a question I could no longer ignore. Who am I without all of this? That question haunted me in the quiet moments, in the long nights, and in the empty spaces where my old life used to be. At first, it was terrifying. I felt as though I had been stripped down to nothing, exposed in ways I had never imagined. I realized that my true self had been hidden under layers of expectation, fear, and the desire to be accepted. The journey within began as an uncomfortable confrontation with my own soul. I had to look honestly at my beliefs, my fears, and the patterns that had guided my life up to that point. It was painful to admit the times I had compromised my values, the times I had allowed fear to dictate my choices, and the moments when I had ignored the small inner voice of truth in favor of temporary comfort or social approval. I learned that rediscovering your true identity requires courage, because it forces you to face the parts of yourself you would rather ignore. I had to confront my doubts, my insecurities, and the false narratives I had built around who I thought I was. It was a humbling process, but it was necessary if I wanted to grow. As I turned inward, I began to realize that identity is not something given by others or earned through achievements. It is something discovered and nurtured from within. It is rooted in character, in values, and in the understanding of who we are in our deepest essence. For so long I had defined myself by what I had and what I could do, but true identity is revealed when everything else is stripped away. I began to see that my worth did not depend on what I owned, or how successful I appeared to the world. My worth came from my spirit, my resilience, and my ability to stand firm even when life seemed determined to break me. In the process of rediscovering myself, I realized that I had been living on autopilot, following paths and goals that were not truly mine. I had adopted ideas of success, happiness, and fulfillment from the world around me, without ever pausing to ask whether they aligned with my inner truth. Loss forced me to stop running, to stop pretending, and to start listening to the voice within that had always known who I was meant to be. I discovered that our true identity is deeply connected to our purpose. When we are lost, when we feel empty, it is because we have disconnected from that purpose. Reconnecting with it requires reflection, honesty, and a willingness to let go of everything that no longer serves the person we are meant to become. I spent hours in prayer, meditation, and quiet reflection, asking for guidance, clarity, and courage. I realized that the answers I sought were not external, they were inside me all along. In the stillness of those moments, I began to recognize patterns in my life, gifts I had overlooked, and the unique strengths that had always been part of my identity. Rediscovering yourself also means forgiving yourself. I had carried guilt, shame, and regrets from my past like heavy chains, believing that they defined me. But I learned that my true identity was not my failures or my mistakes. It was the lessons I had learned from them, and the growth that came from facing them honestly. I began to release the burdens I had carried for so long, understanding that freedom and self-discovery are only possible when we let go of the weight of our past. I also discovered that comparing myself to others had been one of the greatest barriers to understanding who I truly am. I had spent so much energy measuring my life against the achievements, possessions, and approval of those around me, forgetting that each person has a unique path and a unique purpose. When I stopped comparing and started observing, I began to appreciate the individuality of my journey, the uniqueness of my experiences, and the authenticity of my inner self. Another powerful realization came when I understood that rediscovering your identity requires embracing both your strengths and your vulnerabilities. For years, I had hidden my weaknesses, ashamed of the parts of myself that felt broken or inadequate. But in acknowledging these vulnerabilities, I discovered strength. I realized that my weaknesses were not signs of failure, but opportunities for growth, empathy, and connection. The true self is revealed when we are willing to be authentic, honest, and open even in the face of fear and uncertainty. I also learned the importance of cultivating self-awareness. Rediscovering identity is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process of reflection, growth, and refinement. I began to pay attention to my thoughts, my choices, and my responses to challenges, seeking to align my actions with the person I knew I was meant to become. This practice brought clarity and direction, allowing me to make decisions that honored my values and my inner truth. Faith played a central role in this journey as well. I realized that identity is not just about self-discovery, but about understanding our place in something greater than ourselves. Trusting in a higher power, surrendering control, and seeking guidance beyond my own understanding gave me a foundation that no loss or circumstance could shake. It was through faith that I found courage, clarity, and the strength to continue the inward journey, even when the path was difficult and uncertain. I also began to recognize that rediscovering myself was not about becoming someone new, but about uncovering the person I had always been beneath the layers of expectation, fear, and distraction. I started to embrace my passions, values, and unique qualities, understanding that authenticity is the key to fulfillment. Every experience of loss, every challenge, and every moment of reflection became a stepping stone toward a deeper understanding of who I am. The process also taught me the importance of patience. Rediscovering your identity is not instantaneous, it is a journey that unfolds over time. There were days when I felt progress and days when doubt crept in. But I learned to persevere, to trust the process, and to remain committed to exploring the depths of my inner self. In doing so, I gradually built a sense of confidence and stability that was unshakable, rooted not in external validation, but in self-awareness, faith, and clarity of purpose. I also learned to embrace solitude as a tool for self-discovery. When I was alone, stripped of distractions and external influences, I could hear the whispers of my true self more clearly. Solitude became a sanctuary, a place to reflect, to pray, and to reconnect with my inner voice. I realized that spending time with ourselves is not a sign of weakness or loneliness, but a crucial step toward discovering our identity and understanding our purpose. Ultimately, the journey within revealed that my identity was not contingent on what I had lost, but on the values I held, the choices I made, and the faith I carried. It taught me that the essence of who I am is constant even when circumstances change, and that true fulfillment comes from aligning with that inner truth, rather than chasing external validation or possessions. Rediscovering myself allowed me to stand tall in the midst of uncertainty, to embrace challenges with courage, and to approach life with clarity and confidence. It opened the door to opportunities I had never imagined, relationships I could now value authentically, and a sense of purpose that could not be shaken by any external circumstance. It taught me that identity is not given, borrowed, or imposed. It is claimed through courage, reflection, honesty, and faith. In the process, I realized that every loss, every setback, and every challenge had brought me closer to this truth. It was in the silence, in the emptiness, and in the moments when I had nothing but myself that I finally began to know who I truly am. When life takes everything from you, it is easy to feel abandoned, lost, and hopeless. I had been there. Standing in the ruins of my life, feeling the weight of loss pressing down on me, wondering if I would ever regain footing again. Every dream I had pursued, every plan I had made, every step I thought would lead me to security and happiness seemed to crumble before my eyes. In those moments it would have been easy to despair, to surrender to fear, or to believe that life was cruel and meaningless. But it was precisely in the emptiness, in the void created by loss, that I discovered the profound power of faith. Faith, I realized, is not simply a comforting thought or a nice phrase to repeat when things are easy. Faith is the anchor that holds us steady when the storms of life rage around us. It is the invisible thread that connects us to hope, strength, and guidance when everything else seems lost. I discovered that faith is not about having perfect understanding of the circumstances or knowing how the future will unfold. Faith is about trusting when you cannot see, believing when all evidence seems contrary, and standing firm when the world says you should fall. It is a choice to hold on to hope, to believe in something greater than your present reality, and to recognize that loss is not the final word in your story. In the midst of my struggles, I realized that I had been relying too heavily on what I could control, my plans, my resources, and the people around me. When all of that failed, I was forced to confront a truth I had known intellectually, but had never fully embraced in practice. Control is an illusion, and true stability comes from anchoring oneself in faith. Faith became my lifeline. It was not always easy. Some days I felt fragile, weak, and uncertain. I wrestled with doubt and questioned whether my trust in a higher power would truly carry me through. But I discovered that faith grows in the very act of trusting, in the commitment to stand firm even when the winds of life threaten to knock you down. I began to see that faith is not passive. It requires action, perseverance, and a willingness to engage with life despite uncertainty. I took small steps each day to exercise my faith, moments of prayer, meditation, and reflection, allowing myself to surrender my fears and my need for control. I chose to believe that my circumstances did not define me, that my losses were not the end of my story, and that I was being guided toward a greater purpose. In learning to anchor myself in faith, I also discovered the power of perspective. Loss can make us myopic, focusing only on what is gone rather than what remains. Faith allows us to see beyond the immediate pain, to glimpse the unseen possibilities, and to recognize that even in emptiness there is potential for growth, transformation, and restoration. I began to understand that every challenge I faced, every moment of despair, and every experience of brokenness was an opportunity to deepen my faith, to trust more fully, and to connect more deeply with the source of strength that never fails. The process was not without struggle. I remember nights when sleep would not come, when the weight of uncertainty seemed unbearable, and when I questioned whether I could continue. But in those moments, I learned that faith is not about feeling strong all the time. It is about choosing to trust even when we feel weak, to hope even when we feel hopeless, and to stand even when we feel as though we will fall. I also realized that faith is deeply personal. It cannot be borrowed from someone else, nor can it be imposed from the outside. It must be cultivated, nurtured, and exercised in the quiet moments of our lives, in the depths of our hearts, and in the spaces where we confront our own vulnerability. In anchoring myself in faith, I discovered an inner peace that was unshakable, a sense of stability that no loss could remove, and a clarity of vision that allowed me to see the path forward even when the journey was uncertain. I began to notice subtle ways in which faith transformed my experience of life. Small signs, coincidences, and moments of clarity revealed that I was not alone, that guidance and support were available even when invisible, and that every step I took with faith brought me closer to a renewed sense of purpose and identity. Faith also taught me resilience. When I had nothing left, it was faith that reminded me I still had the power to rise, to rebuild, and to reclaim my life. It reminded me that loss does not erase my value, that setbacks are temporary, and that every experience carries a seed of growth, wisdom, and transformation. I realized that faith is not a guarantee that hardship will end immediately, but it is the assurance that we will not face it alone and that we possess the strength to endure, adapt, and overcome. As I deepened my faith, I began to understand that it was also about surrender, not surrender in weakness, but surrender in trust. Letting go of the illusion of control, releasing the need to dictate every outcome, and trusting that a higher plan was at work allowed me to move forward with courage and hope. Faith became the lens through which I could interpret loss not as punishment, but as a guide toward a more meaningful life. I also discovered that faith encourages action. It is not passive waiting or blind hope. It is the willingness to step forward even when the way is unclear. Each day, I took small actions grounded in faith, seeking opportunities, helping others, making choices aligned with my values. And each step reinforced the truth that faith and action are inseparable. I learned that the anchor of faith does not remove the waves of life, but it stabilizes the soul, providing balanced direction and courage to face whatever comes. It reminds us that even in emptiness, we are not powerless, even in loss, we are not defeated, and even in despair, we are not abandoned. Faith also reshapes our mindset. I began to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. I began to see loss not as a sentence, but as a teacher. Faith transforms our perception, allowing us to recognize blessings hidden within hardship, lessons hidden within pain, and purpose hidden within struggle. Through faith, I realized that emptiness is not a void to be feared, but a space to be filled with trust, hope, and alignment with a higher purpose. It is in these spaces that transformation occurs, where the spirit strengthens and where clarity emerges. I also found that faith connects us to a community of support beyond what we can see. As I nurtured my faith, I encountered encouragement, guidance, and inspiration in unexpected places. People, experiences, and even small coincidences that reminded me that I was not walking this path alone. Faith cultivates awareness of unseen support and teaches gratitude for the ways help manifests often subtly in our lives. In essence, faith became the anchor that held me steady when my world felt like it was collapsing. It was the internal compass that directed me when external circumstances were confusing, the source of courage when fear threatened to paralyze me, and the reminder that even when I had nothing, I still had everything I needed to persevere. The power of belief, trust, and unwavering hope. Faith teaches that loss does not define us, circumstances do not limit us, and emptiness does not weaken us. It reminds us that we have a source of strength within us that cannot be shaken, a guiding light that cannot be extinguished, and a purpose that is not negated by setbacks. It transforms despair into hope, weakness into strength, and uncertainty into clarity, showing that even in the most challenging times, we are equipped to endure, to grow, and to rise to a level of understanding and power we could not have reached otherwise. Letting go of the past is one of the most difficult yet most powerful steps we can take on the journey to discovering ourselves. When I look back on my life, I realize that I had spent countless years holding on to regrets, mistakes, and moments that no longer served me. I carried them like heavy stones in my heart, thinking that they defined me or that I needed them to remember who I was. But in reality, these attachments were chains, keeping me from moving forward, keeping me from embracing the life that was waiting for me. I came to understand that the past can only hold power over us if we allow it. It can either be a source of lessons and wisdom or a burden that keeps us trapped in cycles of fear, guilt, and resentment. For a long time, I allowed my past losses and failures to dictate my present. I replayed old mistakes in my mind, questioned my decisions, and even let bitterness seep into my interactions with others. But I learned that dwelling on what has already happened robs us of the energy we need to create a future filled with purpose, joy, and freedom. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending that pain never existed or that mistakes were insignificant. It means releasing the grip that the past has on our emotions, our choices, and our sense of self. I had to consciously choose to forgive myself for the things I had done wrong, to forgive others for the ways they had hurt me, and to release the resentment and anger that had taken root in my heart. This process required humility, courage, and an understanding that life is not about perfection, but about growth, learning, and transformation. When I let go of the past, I discovered a profound sense of freedom. I realized that I was no longer bound by the expectations, judgments, or failures of yesterday. I could breathe, move, and act in the present without the weight of old burdens holding me down. This freedom was not instantaneous. It came gradually through moments of reflection, prayer, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths that had been buried inside me for years. I also came to see that letting go of the past allows us to embrace the future with clarity and confidence. When we are tethered to old experiences, our vision becomes clouded. We make decisions based on fear, doubt, or guilt rather than on wisdom, faith, and purpose. But when we release the past, we open our minds and hearts to the possibilities that await, the opportunities that have always been present, but were hidden behind the shadow of yesterday. One of the most difficult aspects of letting go is accepting that we cannot change what has already happened. There is a natural human desire to go back, to correct mistakes, or to hold on to people, places, and circumstances that we have lost. But I learned that trying to rewrite history is futile. Instead, the power comes from learning the lessons and embracing the growth and using those experiences to guide our actions moving forward. I began to view my past not as a prison, but as a teacher. Every disappointment, heartbreak, and failure carried within it a lesson that, when understood, strengthened my character, deepened my faith, and clarified my purpose. The key was to extract the wisdom without clinging to the pain, to honor the experience without letting it define me, and to allow every challenge to become a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. Letting go also requires courage to release expectations we have of ourselves, of others, and of life. I had long held on to the idea that my life should follow a particular path, that success, recognition, and security were markers of fulfillment. But when those expectations collapsed, I had to confront the truth that life does not always conform to our plans. By releasing these rigid notions, I discovered a flexibility and openness that allowed me to embrace new directions, unexpected blessings, and opportunities I had never imagined. Another essential aspect of letting go is forgiveness. Forgiveness is not just a gift to others, it is a gift to ourselves. Holding on to anger, resentment, or bitterness only prolongs suffering and keeps us anchored to the past. I had to forgive people who had hurt me, forgive circumstances that had felt unfair, and most importantly, forgive myself for the times I had fallen short. Through forgiveness, I experienced a liberation that allowed my spirit to breathe freely and my heart to open to the future. I also came to understand that letting go is an act of faith. It is an acknowledgement that we do not have all the answers, that we cannot control every outcome, and that life's trajectory is often guided by forces beyond our understanding. By releasing the past, we demonstrate trust in the process of life, in the wisdom that guides us, and in the unfolding of our unique path. This act of faith is not passive, it is active and deliberate. It is a conscious decision to choose hope over despair, growth over stagnation, and possibility over limitation. Letting go reshapes our relationships as well. When we release past grievances, misunderstandings, and disappointments, we create space for more authentic and meaningful connections. I found that as I let go of old patterns, I was able to approach others with empathy, compassion, and understanding. My interactions became more genuine, my bonds stronger, and my ability to nurture positive connections deeper. Embracing the future requires a mindset that focuses on what can be created rather than what has been lost. I began to set intentions rather than expectations, to envision possibilities rather than dwell on limitations, and to act from a place of empowerment rather than fear. Each day became an opportunity to step into the person I was becoming, unencumbered by the weight of what I had left behind. I also discovered that letting go of the past allows us to reclaim our time, energy, and focus. I had spent so many years ruminating on what could have been, replaying scenarios, and holding on to regrets. But when I consciously released these patterns, I found that I had an abundance of mental and emotional energy to invest in the present. I could devote myself to meaningful work, nourishing relationships, personal growth, and the pursuit of dreams that aligned with my authentic self. Another revelation came when I realized that the past often holds emotional attachments to identity, status, and validation. We cling to who we thought we were, what we thought we could achieve, or the way we believed others perceived us. Letting go means disentangling our sense of self from these external anchors and discovering the core of our identity that remains constant regardless of circumstances. This process requires self-reflection, honesty, and a willingness to confront the illusions that have shaped our self-perception. I also learned that letting go is a continuous practice rather than a one-time event. The past may surface repeatedly, triggered by memories, emotions, or challenges. Each time it does, we are presented with the choice to cling or release. With each act of release, our resilience grows, our perspective widens, and our capacity to embrace the future strengthens. Letting go enables us to step into life fully, with open hands and an open heart, ready to receive the blessings, lessons, and opportunities that await. It allows us to stop fighting the current of life and start flowing with it, trusting that the path ahead, though unseen, holds purpose and potential. Ultimately, letting go of the past is an act of liberation. It frees us from the chains that bind us, clears the fog of regret and fear, and opens the doorway to a future shaped by conscious choice, faith, and hope. It empowers us to rise above circumstances, reclaim our power, and embrace the person we are becoming. I discovered that the moment we let go, we create space for new beginnings, for growth, and for the realization of dreams that were always possible, but previously obscured by the weight of yesterday.